Now I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Sarah Saffian. Sarah Saffian is an author, a psychotherapist, and a teacher. Ithaka, her critically acclaimed memoir of being an adoptee who was found by her birth family, has become an adoption classic. Sarah holds an undergraduate degree from Brown, an MFA in creative writing from Columbia, and a Master of Social Work degree from NYU. She has contributed to publications including the New York Times, People, Yoga Journal, The Village Voice, and Slate, and has appeared extensively on television and radio, including on CNN, MSNBC, Today, Access Hollywood, and BBC Radio. She gives talks around the country about adoption, therapeutic issues, entertainment, and the craft and business of writing. Sarah has taught at Sarah Lawrence College, New York University, and the New School, and currently teaches memoir writing right here at the Iowa Summer Writing Festival, where this past weekend she taught the course Sunny Side Up, the light stuff of memoir, and this week is teaching Rapid Fire Memoir, a personal piece a day. As a therapist, Sarah counsels individuals and runs support groups in private practice in New York City. Blending her two main areas of expertise, she has created a model called Therapeutic Writing, which uses memoir prompts as a tool for reflection, processing, and discovery. I'm grateful that Sarah proposed today's talk, titled The Crucial Distinction Between Writing for Other Readers and Writing for Yourself, because I know many of us are constantly feeling out the line between the reflection we want to do on our own and the writing we'd like to share with our readers. Here to guide us in this process is Sarah Saffian.
Thank you so much, Becca, for that wonderful and generous introduction. And I'm so glad for everyone to be here. Thank you for being here to explore this crucial distinction between writing for yourself and writing for other people. As Becca mentioned, there'll be a couple of very brief writing exercises to try out what we're talking about throughout the lecture, and if there's time at the end, certainly I'd love to hear any questions. So in the words of David Carr, the late New York Times columnist and author of the memoir, The Night of the Gun, personal narrative is not simply opening up a vein and letting the blood flow toward anyone willing to stare. Less graphically, but no less harshly, Neil Genslinger, in his 2011 New York Times essay, The Problem with Memoirs, which I highly recommend, but just a warning that it is indeed harsh, even if it's wise and accurate. He advises us to avoid the, as he calls it, if it happened to me, it must be interesting fallacy. That is profound and meaningful to you does not automatically mean profound and meaningful to others. And it's not just a matter of content, the myth that only people with shocking, traumatizing, bizarre life experiences have the right to write memoir. I mean, that's actually what I explored in my weekend workshop, as you heard from the description, the lighter stuff of memoir, allowing people who aren't working through trauma to tell their stories too, but it's a matter of the way the content is conveyed. How are you telling the story? You make it compelling by what you do with it. So starting right off, this is sort of the primer for the two very brief writing exercises. We'll use this same prompt with two different approaches. One, the more therapeutic approach of writing for yourself, and the other, the more craft approach of writing for others. So initially, I just invite you to take 2 or 3 minutes, really short, to think of 5 important things that define you in some way, and it'll just be a word or a phrase or a sentence at most. For example, they could be qualities of your personality. They could be aspects of your outlook, your worldview, roles that you play, whether relational in your personal life or professional, labels, doctor, mother, life experiences, especially that perhaps divided your life into a before and an after. You know, those really transformational experiences where you feel like you were changed by them and you're different on the other side. Perhaps places that are especially significant to you and where you feel most at home and fully yourself. Maybe even other people with whom you feel most your true self. So again, just one word, phrase, or sentence for each. It's not ranked. 5 is as important as 1. So, I mean, this is hard enough, so don't worry about the order of them. And don't overthink it. Just see what rises to the surface today as important to include now. We could do this exercise in 6 months, and you might have 5 completely different things. And of course, you have way more than 5 interesting and important things about you, but 5 is a manageable number. So I'll give you, about 2 minutes, just jot them down, see what rises to the surface. How do I define myself today? Okay. Hopefully that was enough time to come up with 5 interesting, important things that define you, as I say, today. We're all works in progress. We're always evolving and growing, hopefully. So we will use this in a little bit in 2 different ways to compare. So I've always been sort of a tough love memoir teacher and writing coach. Anyone who's worked with me is familiar with workshop titles like Get Over Yourself. This is memoir, Mantras such as, who cares? And why are you telling me this? And so what? I would never say get over yourself to a therapy client. So I'm a gentler therapist than a writing teacher, I hope. And metaphorical advice along the lines of, don't give me the lump of clay, give me the sculpture that you make from it. So in other words, as a fellow human being or as a therapist, I may respond with sympathy or shock and awe or amusement to your life experiences. But as your reader, not automatically, not necessarily, unless you do something with the material, okay? Sarah Manguzo, who's the author of the memoirs, The 2 Kinds of Decay, The Guardians, and Ongoingness, says that to write memoir is to prune the enormous hedge of the whole narrative. And Michelangelo supposedly said, every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. So whether we're sculpting from the lump of clay or trimming the unruly hedge into a topiary or chiseling the statue from the block of marble, you can pick whatever metaphor resonates for you. There's this crucial distinction between our whole life experience, the lump of clay, and the narrower story or stories that we create from it, the sculpture. And as you could see from Sarah Manguzo's bio, she's written multiple memoirs, as many people have. Each one is about something different, a different aspect of the whole piece. They're different sculptures from the same lump of clay, if you will. Not to beat that metaphor into the ground, but it's a good one. So that's the divide. Your journal, a valuable resource both for personal exploration and for storytelling, is for you. Relatedly, writing for ourselves and writing for others, while both important, are different endeavors. And since becoming a therapist, in addition to being a memoir teacher and a reader of memoirs and a memoirist myself, I've noticed this distinction all the more and been fascinated to explore the concept of journal writing and its usefulness both creatively as the raw material, again, the clay that we draw from to write our stories for others, and also personally as a means of achieving deeper, clearer self-reflection, processing, and discovery. And I didn't make this up, but I created my own version of a hybrid technique. I call it therapeutic writing, where the focus is not on writing for others, not what we're doing here this week, but within, and where the, get over yourself and who cares mantras of the workshop environment don't apply. I use the same prompts, the same memoir prompts in therapy as I do in the craft workshops. And in both cases, I offer them as frames, and clients, therapy clients or workshop students, determine what content to examine through those frames. They're up to you. For example, writing about the same experience twice. First in the past tense, here in Iowa City, remembering a past experience, and then in the present tense, putting yourself back in that former self's perspective, which I just gave my workshop on Sunday night, to compare the distance of reflection to the immediacy of the moment. Another one is writing from your own point of view and then from someone else's in the same situation to achieve a more 360-degree view of the experience, remind us how subjective memoir is, and that doesn't mean it's fiction. There are multiple truths, right? There's room for multiple truths with a lowercase t. Or writing a letter to yourself, a former self, to remind us of the evolution of our own perspective, or to someone else, to admit or express what, for some reason, you're unable to in real life. So again, the way that therapeutic writing is distinct from a craft workshop is its purpose. So in therapy, if you, the writer, care, that's enough, right? Because the purpose is introspective. It's for an audience of one, or if you're sharing it with your therapist, for the two of you. But the purpose is your own self-reflection. That's why in therapeutic writing groups, which could look a lot like memoir workshops, I don't ask participants to turn the work in or even read it aloud. I actually discourage that, because the point isn't to compose the most lyrical, compelling sentence. You know, your beautiful words on the page are not the point, and I don't want people to feel pressured by that. Well, I'm not a writer, I don't know how to write. Well, that doesn't matter, we're not gonna hear the words. What we're interested in, after silent periods of writing altogether, we talk about what the experience of writing was like. You know, what did you discover about your own experience? What surprised you maybe? What did you find challenging? What was more or less painful than you expected? Any unexpected joys? Any insights gleaned from this exercise? How does it help you process? So the therapeutic benefits of this technique I see as twofold when I'm leading a group. The private experience of the client alone with her words on the page, and then the communal experience of sharing and discussing around that activity. So we're going to try that now with the 5 important things that you jotted down. So first, expand on one of the items on your list, because I'm just going to give you, maybe 4 minutes, using this approach. You're doing this for yourself now. This is the therapeutic writing approach, right? So choose the item that, for whatever reason, you might have the most need to investigate and process in a way that's meaningful to you is enough, remember. Why did I put that on the list? What do I mean that defines me? Why is that one of my 5 important things? So this will help with self-definition, discovery, and reflection. So I'll give you about 4 minutes to explore one of those items with that approach in mind. And then afterward, I'll invite a couple of people to share, but again, not reading the words aloud. We'll do that later, but talking about, as you feel comfortable, of course, because this is the more personal approach, what you discovered from the exercise. What personal processing and self-discovery did you make, with you as the audience of one, okay? So about 4 minutes, and then we'll see if anyone would like to share. Great. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time to get something out of the exercise and see what insights you gleaned and processing and personal discovery. Is there anyone who would care to share? And remember, not read aloud, but as you feel comfortable, talk about what that was like in the way I described it, the insights, surprises, deeper understanding of that aspect of yourself, that thing that defines you. And you can talk about it, explain what the item is if you want, and also where you went with it in the past 4 minutes. All right.
So my, one of the 5 I picked was creativity, which probably people here can relate to, but the reason I picked it was because I credit it to childhood of living in a small town in Iowa and having the 4 channels that most of us had that are Gen X, and you know, not having anything on TV or not having movies, not having distractions like people have today. And so just, I kind of credit that adult imagination and creativity to being bored a lot as a kid and having to come up with things on my own, which writing is a part of that, but also how I've applied it to what I majored in college, was a creative sort of major, and then I've applied it to all the jobs I've had. I've been able to tap into my creativity, to use it to get jobs and to you know, just be more successful in work. And then also the importance of having creative hobbies as an adult, therapeutically, and for myself and for the rest of my family. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, just might ask a follow-up question. Yeah, because the word creative, and you're right, I bet a lot of people put that on their list or some version of that. It's a word we throw around a lot. You know, it can be kind of general, but you got super specific. What do I mean about me? So any of those things you described, the specific ways that, like the reasons you're creative because you were born at a time when there wasn't as much input and you had to have original thought and make your own fun, as maybe our parents used to say, you know, go outside and, you know, you're not allowed to be bored kind of thing. And then how you applied that cultivated creativity in your life. Anything in the past 4 minutes when you were exploring it that, any aha moments like, oh, that's why this or that, or I understand this aspect of myself a bit better from writing it out in a really intentional way. Like, what do I mean by creative? Everyone says, oh, I'm creative. What do I mean? Did you learn anything in the past 4 minutes about yourself, is what I mean. And you did, okay. Like sort of putting a finer point on it, understanding what exactly I'm getting at when I call myself creative, yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Anyone else care to share?
I just, without sounding like starstruck or overly enthusiastic, I marvel at that process just now, and I don't want to share, but at having a prompt like that and trusting, just being present and listening to the words and trusting the words, that it just, so much comes in just a short amount of time. I'm just marveling at the last few minutes and how cool that is. That's all I have to say.
Yeah,
but I discovered
yeah.
a lot in just that short amount of time. It's a really cool process.
Just in 4 or 5
That's
minutes, you discovered a lot.
Yeah, I just solved all my problems, basically. No, but it was really, really incredible. Yeah.
Glad to be your teacher and your therapist for a moment, you know, like wearing both hats at once. No, that's great to hear. I'm so glad. And, you know, we can use these on our own. You know, sometimes with individual clients, I say, well, during this week, just an offering, not required homework, but if you want to, like, write to your dad who you're estranged from, or you want to explore this identity thing, 5 important things is a great icebreaker, and it's also like, you know, how do I define myself is such an important question, of course. Obviously, it's sort of the essence of everything. So to discover something, I'm most excited in a group or with an individual client when they're surprised, you know, by how much they didn't know and that they learned from being intentional and doing the writing, like you're saying, you know, amazed by the process and, you know, enlightened by what does turn up in that process, yeah. It's almost like structured journal writing. Writing in your journal in general is great, but with this frame, you know, it kind of gives you a prompt to work with, an organizing principle. Cool, thanks so much, Mia, I appreciate it. Anyone else burning to share? Yes, please. She's like, I don't know if I'm burning to share. I will. Cool.
So I'm just going to read this because it's easier.
Nope.
Oh.
No reading. I said not reading. This is the therapeutic one, so talk about what you discovered, if you feel comfortable.
Okay, so mine is less therapeutic, though. I just chose the fact that I was a business editor for many years, right? And how did that affect who I am? And what it did was, so I ended up spending a lot of time in the company of successful business people who were not the kind of people that I had spent the early years of my life with. You know, had always been interested in creative pursuits. And then because of my job, I had to go to these business conferences. And being around these business people gave me a set of skills that I never expected to have. You know, these were people for whom how much money you had was everything, right? So I learned how to kind of size people up like they do, right? And go a lot on surface things. And these were skills, I mean, I didn't really get any farther than that, but those were skills I acquired like involuntarily from being around people for whom that kind of thing really mattered a lot.
That's really interesting, because some people might have put something about their profession and some might not have. Like, well, I have a career and I have a job, but it's not going to make the 5 today anyway. You know, I don't want my job to define me maybe, or I hate my job, or I'm in the wrong profession, or it's just not important enough to me. But in your case, it was on the list, but in this, like you say, in this way maybe that you didn't expect. Like, not that, you know, being in the business world is an important part of my identity so much as skills you acquired that were translatable to other areas. That's a very interesting way for that to be an important thing about you. Yeah, right, that it mattered for that reason. So cool. Well, thank you. And I know you wanted to read, but we're going to read later, and that's the important difference, is what did you personally discover versus what are the words on the page. So to that point, when are you ready to write about a personal experience for other people, which is what we're doing here this week, right? A fellow festival teacher and memoirist, Hope Edelman, defines it as you're ready when you're at least approaching an understanding of what it means. Not just that it happened, but what's the meaning of that experience that I can convey to other people? Or back to Neil Genslinger, again, you know, he's harsh, but he's really has it, he's a wise person on the subject. An ordeal served up without perspective or perceptiveness is merely an ordeal, right? Playwright Edward Albee put it this way: rage is incoherent, observed rage can be coherent. So it's about the emotional distance that you get from observing the emotion itself. That doesn't mean that the protagonist isn't going through all kinds of things. It might be very raw and dramatic indeed, but the author, because, right, memoirists are the main character and the narrator, the narrator-author part of you has enough space to have perspective on the emotional state. So if you're too close to your experience, still processing it emotionally, that may be very useful personally, but you're likely not ready yet to be telling it to others, and it can lead to less effective motivations to write a memoir. For example, to settle scores and exact revenge, right? To preach or rant, to confess or unload, to garner sympathy, for sure, to achieve catharsis, you know? People say, oh, it's so cathartic to write my memoir, and then I'm kind of worried about reading it. That's great if that's happening too, but what about me, the reader? And it can be almost as painful for the author herself as the reader. And I'll give you an example anonymously, but I had a student here years ago who was still so close to the tragic experience she was writing about, which had happened 10 years earlier, but so what? I mean, everybody's, you know, evolution and process is different. That's not empirically a long time, you know. She was so close to it emotionally still that she really couldn't tolerate any feedback in workshop. Again, this is a craft festival, you know. It wasn't a support group, it's a memoir craft workshop. Any feedback other than this is beautiful, this is brilliant, or that sounds so hard, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Responses, you know, human responses along those lines. So, and her classmates were respectful, you know. Any reactions and suggestions about the work were communicated with great sensitivity, but she still couldn't bear it. And I respected that, you know, she really needed a support group to keep processing this rather than a craft workshop. And that's okay. That's human. It's just good to know about yourself. And that person may never be ready to write about that, and that may frustrate her if she wants to put her story out there, but it's fine, and it's human, you know? So really listening to yourself for your sake and also for your reader's sake. I mean, the one motivation that makes for a good memoir is the desire to tell a good story, just like fiction, just like any writing. I want to tell a good story, right? So Neil Genslinger says, you know, somewhat graphically, again, say you get stuck under a rock and you have to cut off your own arm to escape. If, as you're using your remaining hand to write a memoir about the experience, your only purpose in doing so is to make readers feel the blade and scream in pain, you should stop. You're a sadist, not a memoirist. You merely want to make readers suffer as you suffered, not entertain or enlighten them. So entertaining and enlightening, to tell a good story, that's the best motivation, the best reason to write a memoir for other people, right? To make your unique experience into something universal, that's the great paradox of memoir, and thereby to offer some kind of shared discovery to your reader. So the point of therapeutic writing is to enlighten ourselves to the meaning of our experience, and that may be an on-ramp to conveying that meaning to other people, or it may be enough just for ourselves. That's what we have to decide, each of us on our own. So to keep the crucial distinction clear, and I'm not alone in this, a lot of writing workshop teachers do this. In my memoir workshops, I encourage students to focus on the work, not the life, and to remind us of that. We refer to the protagonist in the third person, you know, not you, but the protagonist, the main character, the author, if we're talking about, or the narrator, rather than directly addressing the person who's sitting right in front of us who wrote this and had this life experience. It's a little too affronting. Let's remind the author and ourselves that all that we have the right to critique is what's on the page. You know, not asking the person in front of us, why did you feel, think, do that in your life? That's not what we're doing in a craft workshop. Are the words working? Are they conveying this experience to us in a way that we can get, in a way that entertains and enlightens us? Do the words make us care? That's what we're talking about in a craft workshop. In terms of this point of what memoir is and is not, Danny Shapiro, who wrote, among other things, the memoirs Slow Motion, Devotion, and Inheritance, said that when a writer sits down to write memoir, she is not sharing her diary, right, or her journal. She is not confessing. She is not doing some sort of public striptease. Her whole entire life is not up for grabs. So again, to that point of the clay or the hedge or the block of marble, we all have many memoirs in us. What is this particular one about? Again, Danny Shapiro, the memoirist looks through a single window in a house full of windows. After all, we can't look out all of the windows at once, can we? We choose a view. We pick a story to tell. We shift through the ever-changing sands of memory, again, subjectivity, changing of perspective, and in doing so create something hopefully beautiful, by which I mean universal. So from the particular is contain the universal. So what I'd like to offer is a second writing exercise using those same 5 important things, and to expand on one of the items again. It could be the same one you expanded on last time, or choose a different one, but with this different approach. So this time it's for others. That one was for yourself, right? Introspective. Choose the item that could be or become that inciting incident, that organizing principle, that heat-seeking moment which could drive a memoir, that could be meaningful to others, that could make others care about your experience. So expand on the item in a way that you think could strike others as most compelling. And I'll give you about 4 minutes for that, and then I'll invite people to share, and this time they'll read and not talk about it. So the opposite of the sharing from last time. Okay. Okay, hopefully that was enough time to at least get something started. And I encourage you to continue working on this if it's interesting to you later in the week. Would anyone care to share, this is also hard, just like it's hard to resist not reading in the therapeutic setting. In this case, we know from workshops it's hard not to explain what you're about to read to us. We just want the words on the page, so if anyone would like to read what they wrote. Yes, oh, we need the box again, sorry.
When I was 40, the moment my mother handed me a bundle that contained all the details of my father's death in a plane crash, I knew it was in the closet for my entire life, yet felt dread, yet interest, but practiced avoidance emotionally, fearing to face whatever realities were in there. I waited 2 decades to open it.
Wow, wow. So thank you so much for sharing that. Any brief responses to that? And from the craft perspective, because like leaving that at the end, I took 2 decades to open it, kind of working her way toward that, I thought was interesting. One more person who'd like to share? Yes, up here. Oh, okay. Either one, sorry.
We're just reading it, right?
Just reading, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uncle David, cursed with being ambidextrous, sat at the kitchen table dissecting a mud puppy with one hand and eating a luncheon loaf sandwich with the other. Grandma walked by and frowned, but said nothing. Her boy was in college on scholarship. "Do you want a sandwich?" she asked me. Uncle David tapped his scalpel on the mud puppy's heart and smiled at me, a grin of knowing my mind, he supposed. Then he offered me a bite of his sandwich. I bit it. Grandma just rolled her eyes and grabbed my hand. "She'll eat her own, thank you very much. Just keep cutting up that creature of yours."
Wow.
It's about being born into a family of scientists.
Okay. I can tell, yeah. Yeah, right. Dissecting at the kitchen
We
table.
weren't squeamish
It's everyone's
people.
experience. That's great. Thank you for reading that. And there's dialogue in there, right? And the other thing that it made me think of is there's information. Of course, if you're writing for yourself in your own journal, you know everything. So you don't have to share information because the reader is you, right? So you can just get right to the heart of how do I feel and what do I think about this? When you're writing for someone else, you have to explain, you have to show what's happening, you have to work to get the reader into your head and heart. They're not automatically there. So if you do that effectively, then they will care about your story, whatever your story is. So thank you very much for everyone sharing. And I'll just wrap up, and if there's a minute or two for questions, I'd love it. So again, the therapeutic writing, whether we're alone with our journals or we're using more structured prompts and group discussions, aids us in delving deeper and simultaneously achieving reflective distance, right? So it's kind of both. We delve deeper, but also we're writing about it, so it can help us step back and understand it maybe a bit better than when it's so close up and kind of inchoate and unprocessed. In order to gain clarity and understand the meaning of our experiences. As I've said, this can sometimes be an on-ramp to approaching readiness to tell our stories for others who will care because they relate to something universal in our uniqueness. Or other times, the therapeutic writing is a means to its own end. That is, the personal clarity and meaning that we discover is enough in itself. And I'll end once more with Dani Shapiro because this quote from her applies to both writing for others and writing for oneself. She said, "As a writer, my inner life is my only instrument. I understand the world only by my attempts to shape my experience on the page. Then and only then do I know what I think, feel, believe." Thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for jumping in with the exercises. I think we have maybe 5 minutes for any questions, thoughts, comments, complaints.
Thank you. That was great. Do you have any suggestions for journaling? Specifically, if you want to be keeping a journal to sort of help with, I mean, in my case, working with fiction, but is there a good structure that's good to use with a journal? You sit down every day and say, okay, now I'm going to do my journal entries and I'm going to answer 3 questions, or I'm going to try to hit this, and this. Is it good to use a structure when you're trying to journal?
I think it can help motivate and sort of organize your thoughts. You certainly don't have to, but some of the prompts I mentioned today could be helpful. And when I'm, in a therapy session, I offer them kind of spontaneously because I have a million prompts and a certain one might occur to me based on what a client and I are talking about. Like I mentioned, writing a letter to your estranged father. If they're talking about what they actually think and feel, but they can't express it, why not write a letter to that person, or, so-and-so and I have completely different perspectives on what happened. Well, can you write in the first person from the other person's point of view to get a sense of what was going on for them in that moment? Definitely the past, present, writing about a past experience, but putting yourself back in the immediacy can help. I mean, there's so many, writing a letter to your former self, in terms of the habit of journal writing, everyone, just like the habit of writing for craft, everyone develops their own process, I think. I don't know if people are familiar with morning pages from the Artist's Way. Yeah, a lot of nodding. And however you go about that, I do think a lot of people have said that it's helpful very first thing in the morning, before you do anything, brush your teeth, anything, that you just write down some stuff. Maybe it's a dream you had and you want to capture it. Or maybe you wake up anxious. Okay, why am I anxious? Let's figure that out for a second. Or you wake up with a thought. Or it's pure before the input of the day. Like before you reach for your phone, not everybody does that, but a lot of people do. Reach for your journal. Bring it into the bathroom with you, frankly. Do it before you do anything else. Just write down your pure first moments of the morning thoughts. And that's just for you. That's definitely gathering clay. That's not making the sculpture yet at all. And maybe it's just helpful personally, or maybe it can lead to something creative as well. I think it's a great moment to just put some thoughts down. Yes?
Whatever comes to mind about when to start feeling like you're writing for the public, when you're asking yourself a question about your past and you're trying to find an answer, it's probably going to take you your whole life, and you're going to, you might want to start thinking about writing before you know.
Well, it's true. Writing it for yourself can kind of help you investigate whether you're ready to tell it to other people. First of all, do I want to put myself through it, having gone through the experience? And also, do I have the wherewithal emotionally to have enough distance to tell it as a good story? And again, that's the motivation. If that's the motivation, I want to tell a good story. Yes, it's profound and meaningful to me, but I think if I tell it right, it'll be profound and meaningful to other people too. So it's really having the other person in mind. But like I said about that former student I had, everyone's timeline is different. So it's not like, a year, 5 years, 10 years after something happens, you're necessarily ready. You have to decide for yourself. And to your point also, and this is a somewhat separate lecture, which maybe I'll give some time, even if you're ready, when you write it will affect the story, of course. And Jill Cement just came out with a second memoir called Consent, which in some ways is a revision of her first memoir, which she wrote a couple decades ago. And it doesn't mean that it corrects the first one. The first one was wrong, and this is the right version. It's simply, at that point in my life, I wrote about that this way, because this is how I thought and felt about it. I was ready to write about it for other people. now I'm thinking and feeling this way about it, so I'm going to tell the story this way. So that's sort of a separate, first, am I ready at all to tell this to other people? And then, is this the moment, I mean, some people write about the experience pretty soon after. Frank McCourt with Angela's Ashes, just one of many examples. Decades after, he wrote about his childhood in Ireland when he was, in his 50s or 60s, So he had a very different perspective than if he'd written it as a man in his 20s, right? So first of all, though, is am I ready to write it for others at all? And that is entirely up to you. So writing for yourself first can help you figure that out. Yeah. Thank you so much again for coming, and have a great week. Have a great week.
Thank you, Sarah, for guiding us through this experience. We're going to be back tomorrow with Mika Earkin, so join us for that, and have a great lunch.